This presentation goes over the American Indian Movement, an American Indian civil rights organization established during the Red Power movement. July 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the American Indian Movement, also known as AIM, was born. The three primary founders were Clyde Bellecourt, Dennis Banks, and George Mitchell. This group was formed in response to police brutality and other forms of discrimination committed against Indians in the Twin Cities. AIM began to grow on a national and political level as they sought to bring attention to American Indian issues through public protest. Throughout their existence, AIM took part in, as well as organized, many public protests and occupations. The following are a few of the most significant of them: occupation of Alcatraz, the occupation of Plymouth Rock, Trail of Broken Treaties and occupation of the BIA, occupation of Wounded Knee, and the Longest Walk. One of the first national demonstrations they participated in, though not organized by AIM, was the occupation of Alcatraz. This began November 9, 1969, when a group of 89 Native Americans landed on the island of Alcatraz. They declared it to be Indian land by the right of discovery. One of their demands was to turn it into a Native American cultural center. They also wanted the deed to the island. As time went on, the number of Indians on the island continued to grow into the hundreds. The Nixon administration decided that it would not be a good idea to remove the Native Americans by force, so they tried to negotiate with them. By May 1970, the government decided there was little hope of ending this diplomatically, so they cut the power to Alcatraz and blocked the water barge that was supplying the island with fresh water. By this time, the number of occupiers had decreased greatly. Finally, on June 11, 1971, armed federal marshals removed the remaining Indians from the island. There were 6 men, 5 women, and 4 children. This 19-month occupation was the longest occupation of federal land. On Thanksgiving Day 1971, AIM staged one of its own headline-grabbing protests. Russell Means and Dennis Banks led about 200 protesters through the streets of Plymouth, Massachusetts, toward Plymouth Rock in a life-size replica of the Mayflower. Upon their arrival, many spit on the rock, some even began to cover it with sand. Next, Means and Banks and several others boarded the ship and began to take it over. As more police arrived, it was negotiated that no charges would be pressed if AIM would leave and not cause any damage. Later that night, John Trudell and a few other AIM members went back and painted Plymouth Rock red. The Trail of Broken Treaties was a cross-country protest that was designed to bring attention to American Indian issues, such as treaty rights, living standards, and inadequate housing. It began on the West Coast and arrived in Washington, D.C. November 3, 1972. The group brought with them a 20-point position paper to present to the president. While in the BIA headquarters, they felt their demands were not being addressed by the BIA staff. Later that day, GSA police attempted to get the group to leave at the end of the day. Instead, the activists took over the building. Throughout the occupation, members caused over $2 million worth of damage. After 6 days, President Nixon's administration agreed to hear their grievances. They also provided $66,000 in transportation money to the group in return for a peaceful end to the occupation. In order to bring attention to the corruption of the BIA and a tribal council on Pine Ridge, elders of the Oglala Sioux tribe asked for assistance of AIM members. So, on February 28, 1973, around 200 members of AIM and the Oglala Sioux occupied the town of Wounded Knee. Occupiers fortified the town and took up arms and ammunition. This caused both Tribal President Dick Wilson as well as FBI, U.S. Marshals, and BIA police to move in. The group exchanged gunfire, which led to the death of 2 Sioux men as well as 1 FBI agent becoming paralyzed. AIM leaders and their followers surrendered after negotiating a peace pact with the government that stated the activists would be treated fairly and the government would conduct a fair review of several treaties. The longest walk was an AIM-led walk across the country to support tribal sovereignty and bring attention to 11 pieces of anti-Indian legislation. On February 11, 1798, they began their 3,200-mile trek across the United States. On July 15, thousands of Indians and non-Indian supporters marched on Washington, D.C. Throughout the week, rallies were held at multiple sites to confront their issues. The week following the longest walk protest, the United States Congress turned down a bill that would have revoked treaties with Indian nations. They also passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which among other things allowed for the use of peyote during worship. AIM held their last unified protest in 1978, and by the late 1970s no longer held national headlines. They also split into 2 groups, one led by Clyde Belcourt and the other by Russell Means. This division led to the downfall of the national chapter in favor of smaller regional chapter. AIM still remains as one of the longest-lived national organizations representing American Indian issues.